Hey, welcome everybody to the next episode of Leaders and Friends. We have today as our guest one of my favorite people, and that's Amy Wallace. Amy is an author. She helped me write Hot Seat. I discovered Amy by reading the book Creativity Inc., which Amy helped Ed Catmull, who was one of the founders of Pixar. Amy was a friend that I had in a really tough time of my life. As I was leaving GE, it was a tough story. It was a tough time for me, and she kind of helped me get through it with a good combination, I think, of reflection and candor, but also grace and support. So I always have a soft place in my heart for Amy. Amy, thanks for being with us today, and let's have a great conversation.
Of course, of course. I'm honored to be here.
So, Amy, let's just start by how does somebody become an author? Like, how did you start writing, and what's been your kind of progression in all this?
Well, I went to college and didn't know what I wanted to do. Um, I'd moved around a lot in high school. I just kind of wanted to have a collegiate experience and do extracurriculars. And all I'd really done up to that point is read a lot and and wonder what the hell life was going to be like. I think I happened into journalism because I was kind of a shy young person, and when I was given an assignment I had like this mandate to go and talk to people, and it freed me up a little bit. I liked the way I felt when I went out and I was talking to other people for a reason, as opposed to just being me. And that just something clicked in me, and I wanted to try to do that. And I interned in college, and I did various sort of apprenticeship kind of jobs, and ended up getting into newspaper writing. I started off at the New York Times as a very lowly person and ended up at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution and learned how to really be a reporter. Then went to the LA Times and had done that for a long time. Then I got interested in magazine writing. I wanted to write longer form, and I did that for a long time. I ended up going back to the LA Times to be an editor. And along the way, just sort of through happenstance, I I got approached to meet Ed Catmull at Pixar, founder of Pixar, really a genius of a man who had turned from computer science to studying how to manage creative people. That was really what he had assigned himself as his job at Pixar, how to be the best manager of creative people that he could be. And he wanted to write a book. He is notorious for sort of trusting his gut about people, because I'd never written a book before. So arguably he should have hired someone else. But we met, we clicked. I had written a lot about the business of Hollywood at that point, so I was knowledgeable about his area, but I didn't really understand some of the things he wanted to talk about right away. And that book did very well. So, and I enjoyed it. I'd really focused my magazine work on profile writing, and
Mhm.
in a way, ghostwriting or collaborative writing with someone else writing in their voice shares some characteristics with profile writing, because you're trying to capture the person. You're just doing it with some different tools.
Mhm.
You're facilitating another person's story. So that really made sense to me. Um, and I enjoyed it. And I learned a lot
What
on
was
that.
the one thing, Amy? What was the one thing from Ed that like every human being could learn from Ed Catmull?
Oh, I think he actually is certifiably a genius. He created a lot of the computer code that is behind computer animation, but he's humble. He always thinks that always hire people who are smarter than yourself. That's one of his,
Mhm.
mottos. And you can kind of look at him and go, well, no one's smarter than you, Ed. But he thinks they are. People are good at different things.
Yeah.
Um, he really believes good ideas can come from anywhere, so don't just listen to the top C-suite people, listen to the people who are on the line. There's a lot of, at first I even said to him, like, it's almost like a socialist idea. He's not a socialist, but he really believes in everybody having value and everybody coming to the table and having answers. And that was pretty impressive, given that when I met Ed, Pixar, every movie they'd ever made had opened #1 at the box office,
Wow.
which is just unheard of and is no longer true for Pixar, unfortunately for them. But at that point, it was like they had this special sauce. And he he's a lot of the reason why. John
And when
Lasseter is
you,
one who gets a lot of credit for the storytelling, but Ed is a lot of the reason why the
as a
place.
genius, yeah.
Yeah.
When you come at, any story you're writing, you're not a domain expert. So you need to discover. So, my observation of you is you had a good nose for bullshit and you were a good listener. But how do you, and you're a cynic, which I think you have to be, which you kind of have to be
No, I'm not a
a
sin.
good reporter. But how do you use, how did you develop that and how do you use it to your advantage? And how do you use it, kind of when you go to different people in different categories?
I mean, you're right. I've always been a generalist, which sometimes gets me criticized. How dare you write about vaccines? You don't know anything. I've gotten that kind of criticism at times, but I've liked daring to wander into areas that I'm not an expert on. And then I do a huge amount of research to get educated. So I don't sort of write casually in those areas. But it's part of the reason I like this job is it's never boring. You always are learning. Sometimes it's hard and figuring things out can be hard. I know I had to have you explain things over and
Mhm.
over. And there were several people at GE who helped me understand things like Alex Dmitriev, perfect example. How
Mhm.
much time did he spend with me? A lot,
Mhm.
helping me through GE Capital stuff or whatever it was. So, um, I like that part of it, but it involves a lot of work. The sort of BS meter, I do not agree that I'm a cynic. I would say that I
I
am
say that in the most loving way
I know, I
possible. I hope you
know.
know that.
I would say I do have a nose for BS. Um, and I'm rigorous. I think when you and I first met and you were still deciding on what writer to pick. And you said, if we do this together, what's it going to be like? And I said, well, just pick somebody that you can imagine spending a lot of time with who you kind of naturally click with because there will be times when I'm really bothering you.
Mm.
You're going to say I'm stressed out and I'm going to say, what did that look like? Are you fighting with your wife? Are you eating too many salty snacks? What are you doing? And you'll be like, I want to move on. I already said it was stressful. I'm like, no, I mean,
Yeah.
so, and that we did have that relationship where I think you said, you know, she's a pain in the ass, but she's my pain in the ass.
Yeah. Something
That
like that.
is
Yeah.
exact. I think that's a great description of me.
Yeah.
Like I was not going to let you. I wanted you. Pushed you to explain things I knew readers of the book were going to want you to explain, even when they were hard for you to explain,
Yeah.
because I
Yeah.
wanted to protect you in that way. I didn't want you to ever be criticized for leaving something out that people would be like, look, he read a whole book and he wouldn't even write about this central issue. And
Yeah.
we had several conversations like that. I'm still not answering your question about the BS meter. I mean, in some ways, I think it just comes naturally to me. You can kind of, we can all tell when somebody's not really telling the truth. I didn't feel that with you. I never felt
Mm.
like you were not being truthful. The question with these books sometimes is urging people to process things that have happened to them to get to the other side and really dig into some stuff. I
Yeah,
mean,
I think that's a good way to say it. Like you've got to process things that you wish were slightly different than what they really were, you know.
yeah,
And that difference actually is the hardest part about truth, actually, is not like lying versus truth. It's like shading the truth just a little bit to be a little bit more palatable. And I found that you could really encroach on that, which I liked. I very much liked.
well, you
You're
were
a
really,
storyteller, we wanted the book to be about storytelling. And a lot of leaders, at Stanford Business School, they have entire classes on storytelling. Like, What's it all about? How do you get good at it? And why does it matter?
Yeah, I mean, we learn through story. That's you can write a book or a speech that's just never do this, always do that. We can hear that and we can kind of take that in, but you really learn those sort of central ideas of how to run your business, how to run your life by hearing about a story, a narrative. And that's what these books always end up being, even if they're leadership books, even if they sometimes have a list or two in them. The thing that makes the good ones successful is that you invest in some characters and you follow through their development, and they're told that way. I think one of the challenges for somebody like you, who a CEO, on the road hundreds of days a year, giving a zillion speeches, what works as a speech story. And in the book telling, we often had to push to broaden some of those stories. You knew they were good stories, so they worked in the room. But for a book length telling, you have to get a little more detailed. So one thing that always surprises people about these books, it surprised my husband when I was working on your book, because he'd never seen me write one of these books before, because we had not met when I was writing Creativity Inc. Is he just assumed I was going to sit down with you, we were going to record a bunch of tape, I was going to clean up the stories, and we were going to have a book. And I was like, no, I have to talk to a lot of people around him, because to either broaden out stories Jeff knows he wants to tell, or find stories sometimes that Jeff doesn't even remember because they're really, you know, they're evocative of a point he's trying to make, or they really illustrate something. I mean, I loved the story, and you didn't tell it to me, about when you were running GE Healthcare, and a
Mhm.
group of the African American employees at GE Healthcare came to you and said, we really have some issues we want to talk to you about. They're very personal. We want to have you over for dinner in somebody's home. And they literally served, fried chicken and macaroni and cheese. And you guys all sat around on the floor and talked about why certain things were difficult for them, being a minority group in this bigger machine. When I heard that story from, I can't even remember who told it to me first, I was like, we have to put this in. This says so much about how to manage, how to lead. Your HR person said, you don't have to do that. And you're like, I'm doing it. I'm going to go. Says
Yeah.
so much about you, frankly, that you did do that. You could have avoided it. It might have been hard or embarrassing, but you went. So I was like, Jeff, we're putting this in. Some of the stuff is going to be, I mean, obviously I wouldn't have put it in if you didn't want to, but you saw the wisdom of it. Your brain hadn't stored it in the file folders of, these are the big stories of my leadership. But to me, it was really evocative
Mhm.
of how you led. Um, and so, I think we talked to 70, with your help, I talked to 70 other people around
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
And I think most people who see or know that ghostwriters do their thing don't necessarily know that many of us, I don't know if everybody does it, but you end up reporting around the person to flesh out the book and make the book stronger. So that's so it's not so much that that's a BS meter
Right.
tool. It's more a storytelling tool. I want to
Storytelling. Yeah.
tell the best story for you in your voice that I can.
So we spent a lot of time together. You spoke to a lot of people on the GE network, and you're married to a portfolio, somebody that runs his own
Investment firm. Yeah. Yeah.
investment firm, right? So you know GE from a number of different ways. Like, and doing this, what did you learn about GE, and what did you learn about me and leadership, and how did, and I know a lot of it showed up in the book, but just reflect on that.
What I learned about you and GE. Well, the main thing this connects to your earlier point about me being a generalist. I didn't know that much about GE when I started working with you. My husband, who runs an investment firm, had met you when he worked at Capital,
Mhm.
had when you came in to talk to those folks, and he was like, you need to take a meeting with Jeff Immelt, because he's solid. He's for real. So what I learned a lot about how GE was structured. Obviously, sort of the different. I didn't know that you made turbines. I learned things like that. But the real thing that I learned was the culture of such a huge 300,000 people work for this company all over the world. And there was a shared culture that was so devoted to one another and devoted to the company. I think some of the people who self-select into working for GE are those kinds of people who want that kind of community. And I just hadn't really ever been exposed to that large a company and how you keep that ethos healthy. And sometimes fail to keep it healthy because it's complicated and very disjointed to some degree and very spread out. Um, but I was really impressed by that and how much it meant to people that they'd worked for GE. And I mean, as you recall, like the first people we interviewed together were your parents, because, and to me, this is a really important part of your story. You grew up in GE. You were a
Yeah.
GE kid, and your dad was a purchasing agent, and you lived we went and saw the house you grew up in, and you were your family was middle class because GE allowed them to be. And your love of the company from boyhood on, what I thought was really important to communicate. And as you said, your mom had the opposite of Alzheimer's. She remembered everything.
Yeah.
I mean, she was 90 when we interviewed her, and she was
Yeah.
like incredible. Um, so um, I was really moved by that, and I knew you were, and you had told me about it, but I kept seeing it. Again, it was more powerful to me when I saw that kind of connection that people had.
Thanks for
That was
um,
really important to communicate.
yeah, no, it's such a complicated story, and you were able to kind of, I think, weave it, pull it together, which I always tell people could never have done it without your help. So thanks for that.
No, thank you.
We're in a time right now of kind of political season, media fragmenting. You've been kind of in this world for a long time. Maybe two questions, Amy. Like, what do you think of media today, and what is it about President-elect Trump that makes him such an effective communicator, regardless of what side you're on?
Well, I'll start. Media today is, a 5-hour conversation. Which we don't have, thankfully. And I'm not an expert. I mean, I have some sadness about watching what's happening in media today. I think newspapers are really struggling. Magazines are really struggling. All the things I learned my craft, all the places that taught me how to do this, they're having trouble. And that worries me because I think, the checks and balances of a healthy media, particularly newspapers in my, elderly life, but all different kinds of media that dig into things and represent people who don't have a voice or don't have power to interrogate things themselves. I think the media has an important role to play there, and I am worried about the business model. It's really suffering. And to state obvious things that other people are really more articulate about, the siloed nature of media, where people are, I'm only going to get what I want to hear from, Fox or from MSNBC, and I'm never going to hear anything else. That's a problem. That was the great thing about a newspaper. I know we're not going to go back to everyone reading them, but if you bought a paper newspaper, somebody was curating that for you, and you understood that different newspapers judged the most important story, the lead story, to be this or that. And you understood that there was a point of view there, but it helped you understand, okay, I'm informed. I know the news of the day. And I think now, when everyone's reading on their phones and on the web, you're getting more and more of what you've chosen before. And
Mhm.
you're not always getting served up the thing that you might not know about, but you maybe should. And
Mhm.
And newspapers used to do that for you. And I don't know what the solution is because it's complicated, but that's worrisome to me. Um, why is Trump an effective communicator? I, again, others have said this, but I really think it's true. He reads as authentic.
Hmm.
And some of what makes him read as authentic is some of the crazy stuff he says. But people think, well, he doesn't really mean that. But we know he's speaking from the heart. He's speaking from his gut. And yeah, he's not really going to do that horrible thing he said. Don't worry about that. He's just kidding. But he's for real. But when Kamala Harris says, I'm going to be the voice of change, but then she won't distance herself from the guy who's been running the country for a long time, people think, okay, talk about a BS meter. They think that's BS.
Yeah.
She's not a person of change. So I do think there are a lot of lessons for Democrats, of which I am one,
Yeah.
about you got to get real.
Mm.
And I'm not laying all this at Kamala's feet. I
Mm.
think there was many mistakes were made, but weirdly, the crazier Trump talked, I think the more young men of all different ethnic backgrounds, young women of all ages, people are like, well, I don't really like that part of him, or I don't really like this, but I know he's really going to tell me the truth, which frankly, I don't think is true. I think he's a big fat liar, but he read as a truth teller,
Yeah, no, no.
communicates
And
like a person
maybe
who really is telling the truth.
maybe intersecting the two, Amy, like when you think about the popularity of Joe Rogan, in the world of a 2 or 3 hour podcast, right? So, to be honest with you, I'm a newcomer to podcasts, but when I started to hear all the attention about, President Trump going on Joe Rogan and stuff like that. I now have the subscribe, and it's great.
Right.
So
I
I
mean,
have to say, like, so, how do you like, is that the future, do you think,
well,
or
I think
what?
Joe Rogan's interesting because um, he's very smart. And he's very informed. I say that with a slight asterisk after it, but he does his research. So he's not just blathering. And that I would say is the key to any good interview. Howard Stern is a great interviewer. I know some people think he's weird, whatever. He's a great interviewer because he's ready. He knows everything about the person. Um, now, the asterisk I put next to Joe Rogan is sometimes he traffics in some pseudoscience that I think is dangerous, but he's a great interviewer. And I think that long form thing where they talk until they're done.
Mhm.
Again, I think that reads authentically to people. Not everyone's going to have 3 hours to listen to that, but they feel like it hasn't been packaged or edited in a way that's going to make it fake.
Yeah.
By the end of the 3 hours, if you're really interested in the person, not all of them are 3 hours, but when he lets somebody go, you really have some insight, and it's unfiltered to some degree. I mean, I'm sure they edit some things out of it, but or maybe they don't. But they let the person talk until they're all talked out, basically. And
Yeah.
again, I
There's a
think,
value to time. There's a value to long form. There's a value for time. And I think particularly the more, social media grows, I think the more that becomes the corollary to it. And again, it's, people are willing to kind of listen to things that are generally true, even though they know certain things, certain specifics just aren't true, right? But it's
see,
in
I
this
think that's
plurality.
so interesting about Trump that, there are various news organizations did, during debates, like, here are the 19 lies he told, here are the 29 lies he told. And they were right to do that, like fact check him. But nonetheless, I think a lot of people who voted for him know that he doesn't tell the truth all the time, and yet he feels truer to them
Uh,
than the alternative.
I
And
know. I'm with you.
that is a wake-up call
I'm
because
with
that
you.
is a style of communication that is effective.
Yeah, no, there's something there. And again, authenticity sometimes trump the other word, trumps everything else, and people need to remember that.
Have you
Amy,
seen,
go ahead.
no,
I'm sorry.
I'm just curious, have you seen the movie The Apprentice
Yeah,
about
yeah,
his formative years? I just
yeah,
watched it the other night and I thought it was really fascinating in terms
yeah.
of
No, I
learning
knew
that.
him. We were not bosom buddies, but I knew Trump in those days. And
Mm.
and Joe Rogan was like the commentator for this grungy reality show that we had on a Monday night. And so, you look back like 20 years later, and Rogan is the richest podcaster and most powerful media guy. And the guy that started The Apprentice is President of the United States. You'd say, holy cow.
No, and I'm actually
Jeff Zucker knew something. Yeah.
well, so there, I should have been clear. So there's this new movie called The Apprentice,
Okay.
and it's dramatic. There's a person playing young Trump in the 80s.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's about his relationship with Roy Cohn,
Yeah.
and learning that style of communication. Never attack, attack, attack.
Never fall
Never
back.
admit wrongdoing. Never admit a mistake. All that stuff. It's pretty. You'll
Amazing.
interested in it. It's
Amy,
good.
what are you working on now? And what's the book you'd love to write if you had the chance?
Well, so I'm working on a third collaborative book, ghostwriting job. It's with a woman that unfortunately I can't tell you who it is. We are almost done. But it's not a leadership book. It's more of a narrative of an incredible life lived. Um, and we're almost done with that. And that's been a great experience. Because it's a different storytelling challenge. I have a book idea that I'm not sure is going to go forward, but the general idea is, and this is a little bit of a departure, um, it's a book about the healing power of being outside and being in the outdoors. I don't know if you've ever heard of Knowles. It's the National Outdoor Leadership School. It's the kind of place that GE might have done a partnership with as a team building exercise. I don't know that it ever happened, but they take anyone and everyone at all ages and ability levels into the outdoors in various ways. And I did a backpacking trip with them in March. Um, they were on our trip. There were people in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s. I was the 60s. There was one other guy in their 70s. And we put on 55-pound packs and we tromped all over Utah. Um, and I'm exploring a way of telling some stories about that. Why is that the book I want to write? Well, I do think in this time of fragmentation and silos that there are ways that we can all come back together if we depend on each other and actually communicate doing that. And this trip was a perfect microcosm of that, where we all had different views. I think the guy who was in his 70s was somebody who he lived in Canada, but he was a total Trump supporter. There were younger people who were not, but we were all moving in the same direction. We were all having to help each other. That guy who I don't agree with politically, when I tried to get up, and I was coming back down, I was like, I'm coming back down. I can't. He caught me. And I do think there's something there, not just about breaking down divisions, but about really connecting to other people, regardless of our different opinions, that I'm intrigued by. You hear about this the military does this. It breaks down all kinds of divisions. People think they know they are not comfortable around people of color or whatever, and then they have to rely on them, and they're their best friends. So I'm intrigued by that, and I think there may be a way. Knowles particularly has a really interesting history. So I liked being able to tell some of the history of the organization, why it was founded. So
Yeah,
I'm basically writing a book proposal right now
yeah,
about that and trying to see if it's gonna sustain what it needs to really
nice.
connect with people.
Yeah, the best, my daughter's now 37, and the best father-daughter thing we ever did was we climbed Mount Kilimanjaro together, and we did it in 2010, and we still talk about it several times each year. It's just so embedded. And I think it just was this incredible time together where you're just on the most basic level,
Yeah.
relationship and of no distractions, focus on a goal. So yeah, no, I think that'd
Yeah.
be,
And you're testing yourself,
yeah,
and you're also having to ask for help or admit vulnerability, or,
yeah.
some of those barriers come down more naturally
And so
than
maybe you write that book, and in the middle, you put in the chapter about the financial crisis, and you can have the best, you can have the best of
best of both
every
worlds. Yeah,
world. Yeah,
yeah,
that'd be great. Hey,
yeah.
Amy, it's so great to see you. I have such great feelings, for you and the work we did together, and I wish you nothing but the best.
I feel the same. I feel the same. It was a great experience to work with you. So
Great.
I'm always here if you need me,
Thanks, Amy. Same here.
of course.